In the beginning, gods, that's an incomplete sentence. I'm afraid that doesn't meet the standards, Heda.
Don't you see there's an ellipsis?
Oh, okay, so we fill in the blank. In the beginning of what?
Well, I was reading some manuscripts or translations of manuscripts of the earliest versions of Genesis 1:1. And interestingly enough, it doesn't say in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. It said in the beginning the gods created the heaven and the earth.
So say again, what translation are you looking at?
The earliest scholarly translation of the early manuscripts of the Old Testament. So essentially the idea that Genesis 1:1 is talking about a monotheistic deity is something that was projected backwards onto the text through later Judaism and Christianity. But in early Judaism, the Jews actually did not necessarily believe their God to be the only God. They just believed their God to be their special and great God, but that it was taken for granted that God lived within a pluralistic, polytheistic universe.
Well, I have to say, in my 78 years, I've never heard that. I suppose there's an English translation of the Bible in those words that you've looked at.
Not a devotional one. I mean, most of the Christian Bibles or Jewish translations obviously are going to translate it according to what they believe, according to their creed. But they're scholarly translations of the earliest manuscripts that I can point to your way.
Yeah, I'd be curious because I have a Bible from the earliest translations copy myself that I frequently look at because it's so different than what we think of. It's the George Lamsa translation from the Peshitas.
Yes.
The Aramaic.
But that's only the New Testament, not the Old Testament, right?
No, there's some things in it from the Old Testament too.
Okay.
I didn't know that. I bought a copy of it. We were all talking about it some time ago, and I got a copy of it, but it's just the New Testament, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I've got it right here.
Okay, go check it out.
Lamsa's preface, where he talks about words that resemble one another and how they got it wrong. There are several references to Genesis and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Samuel and Kings.
This is just the introduction.
This is in the introduction called Words That Resemble One Another.
So, Sidi Daoud, in case you missed the introduction, Seda Badria said she has a translation, a scholarly translation of Genesis, which starts off, in the beginning, gods create the heavens and the earth. Plural, gods plural, but...
Well, it's interesting that Elohim, a word for God or a name of God, is in fact a plural form, apparently.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to here. I've got it in front of me. The author writes, "In the beginning, God created heaven and earth." That is the way they translate it, yet there is scarcely anyone so ignorant in the field to not know that the original reads, "The gods created the heaven and the earth." Which reading confirms to the Phoenician idea that God employed lesser divinities to untangle chaos. The Phoenicians had long been established when the Hebrews broke into some few provinces of their land. It was quite natural that these latter should have learned their language and borrowed their ideas of the cosmos.
Well, that's interesting. It hadn't occurred to me that it was a reference to the lesser gods, but it makes sense. I mean, there's still room for the supreme God. It's just that they think he had help.
It could very well be nothing, but the word itself, the word.
Elohim could mean in the beginning, the word created.
You might say.
Well, yes, of course.
The created logos.
Yes, of course. of course, but that would mean that Elohim was either a name for the word or a name for the words spoken to create the world, if it's plural.
Right.
So we're waiting on you,
Well,
Al-Bashir,
It
to,
is interesting. What, were you waiting on me?
yes,
Yeah, you're supposed to read us the New Testament.
you got it? And
Oh, yeah.
Or the Old Testament. You're supposed to read us the Old Testament. and
Holy Bible from the ancient Eastern texts. I made a couple comments about it. The words mistaken page. Genesis chapter 1. God created the heavens and the earth in the very beginning.
No, well, you know, it is customary for Jews to consider Elohim to be singular, even though it's clear that the etymology looks pretty darn plural. So, I mean, I don't know if they use Elohim or if they just stick in Adonai the way they like to everywhere that the name of God comes up.
But what are they when they speak of that Elohim? Are they talking about the same as the Hindus speak of when they talk about Ishvara?
Well, Ishvar, yeah, well, maybe. I mean, they wouldn't know that, but
could you remind me what's the difference between Ishvara and Brahma?
yeah, Brahma, I would think would have to be the supremest thing because
Right.
because the others are incarnations.
Well, Brahma is beyond being, right?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Well,
Ishvara is the principle of all manifestation, which is, you might say, being.
Yeah, some people say that
Part of beyond
Ishvara is also the personal God, the primal personal God.
You could break it down that way, but finally Brahman is the one.
Yes.
And who is Shiva then?
One of the attributes of Brahman.
Yeah, or incarnations. I mean,
Or incarnations, yes. Okay.
yeah, I mean, who are the big 4 or 5 avatars?
Well, there's Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, creator, preserver, and destroyer. But finally, all is Brahman.
Yes, right. But there are references to, well, there may be other incarnations of Vishnu rather than Brahman, or Atman.
Yes, I'm sure. I don't know these, but
no, I don't have their system worked out. But it doesn't need to work for me. It needs to work for them.
yeah.
Well, the problem there, the operative word you used is system. That's the problem. I mean, what can any of us know of the supreme reality? Pretty much nothing. But the realities of the gods are something that if you just stop thinking about the last 2,000 years of Western religious history, you're like, that makes sense. The psychological and experiential reality of individual humans says that there are gods. Maybe not in the exact anthropomorphic sense of the ancient Greeks, but that they exist.
Certainly not in the anthropomorphic.
No, of course.
And, you know, I think metaphysicians have completely gone the wrong direction. Essentially, someone who experiences the divine reality is like someone who doesn't know anything about bullets or about guns, but who is shot in the gut. They have directly experienced it, whereas metaphysicians sit around talking about the chemical composition of lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, good description.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any particular contradictions here. I mean, it seems to me this is a criticism of no merit.
I'm sorry, criticism of
what?
Without merit, he says.
Metaphysicians. Yes. There's nothing in metaphysics that would rule out, you might say, the gods, so to speak, as you find in the other traditions like Hinduism and the Greek tradition.
Metaphysics means the study of or knowledge of things beyond the purely corporeal realm.
Right.
And we do that all the time. In every conversation we have, we refer to things beyond the corporeal realm. So we're metaphysical understandings.
It's the metaphysicians who focus on the divine unity exclusively, or the transcendent exclusively, that seem to ignore or be unaware of the fact that the divine is manifest in multiplicity also.
Well, you would find all sorts of metaphysicians who follow both the Hindu and the Greek.
That's true.
That don't emphasize that way. I mean,
no, I'm not talking about all.
If you look at Plotinus or anybody else like that.
No, I'm saying I think the criticism is about those who want to keep the divine out of multiplicity. Would be my guess, is what.
No, I think it's just they are denigrating which is the highest possible view.
Well, I suppose there are metaphysicians who write about metaphysics in a way that's not as good as others. I mean, it's either inaccurate or confusing or misleading.
Hey.
So there's some good ones and others that are better and worse,
You would have to include in that, of course, the Taoists, who said that which can be named is not the highest reality. Okay. And that I think every tradition has that same statement, or has in some form or another. That isn't to say that they deny the possibilities within the beyond being. It's just that those possibilities cannot be, in fact, made manifest.
They're put into words. Yeah, the words are they're beyond words too, I guess.
Yeah, the reality is always beyond the words, but there are different ways in which one might experience the divine, and one could be excused for calling those different experiences or ways of experience different gods.
Well, they always speak of the gods in both Hindu metaphysics and the metaphysics of the Greeks. So I don't think this is anything.
But the metaphysics of the monotheistic philosophers, if you will, is just not going to deal with that the same way.
Well, that's why, I hold with a perennialist view instead of the more exotic external view. That's all.
Well, of course.
One could say that the doctrine of the Trinity is a deviation from
That's true.
monotheism. It's God is the Father, the Son is the Father, the Holy Ghost is the Supreme. They're all co-equal or something. So it's a form of
it's true. There are three.
Perhaps.
And when we talk about God being the Father, we're not talking about God pure being. We're talking about Ishvara.
I don't know about that, but God the Father is rather a bore. I think the Trinity, brings some of these things down to life for people. And the original meaning of the Gospels was to put some blood into religion. Unfortunately, this whole idea of, Jesus being a real living being with blood flowing through him and getting resurrected a whole man. Instead, the later Christian, and then we end up with the Christianity of today. But if you go back to the original sources and you go back to the older religions, it's a religion of real existing blood. I mean, the entire concept of asceticism of saying we were born into this world in order to torture ourselves and kill ourselves unto death for this God who loves us so much doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Not in isolation, no.
No, not in isolation. I mean, there's a place for it, don't get me wrong, but it's also been taken way out of context and taken to extremes that I don't think are actually beneficial in general, except for a few aberrant personality types.
Yeah, there's no, it should be no surprise that people take things to extremes. They always tend to.
Well, yes, look at our politicians nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, they don't even know what they're taking to extremes, but yeah.
And once you've decided to take something to extreme, you can come up with the metaphysics to defend it.
Well, yeah, and
well, see, metaphysics is not dependent upon human thought. And that is the difference between it and these extremes we're talking about.
Well,
now, there may be someone who wants to pretend to be a metaphysician and who is merely voicing his human thinking. That's maybe true.
All description of metaphysics comes through human thinking and human language.
No, it doesn't. It's quite to the contrary. It doesn't. That's the fact of the matter is it is an expression of the word through the highest level of knowledge or capability that some men have.
I would have to strongly disagree with that. I would have to say there's metaphysics that comes from the same place that poetry comes from, that is somehow inspired, but the metaphysics is secondary and the experience is primary. But there are far too many cases where unexperienced men or men that wanted to claim that they had great experience wrote these massive obtuse treatises on metaphysics that really are exercises in futility. And so you might
say that the divine word that is experienced by saints and avatars is not an experience?
Sure, it's an experience.
It's a higher level of experience than, in fact, human thought.
Yeah, but it's not metaphysics.
Oh, well, metaphysics, it is both metaphysics and the spirit, depending upon whether you're talking about the knowledge on the one hand, or if you're talking about experience of a reality from above. That's
implies a kind of system, and there may be different systems that people use to try to describe what they believe to be reality.
Yeah, language is a system.
There's always a gap. There's a gap between experience and expression of it.
And that's exactly. And that's why, for instance, solids can't be expressed.
Right, but I've read Augustine enough times forwards and backwards to feel like, you know what, maybe he doesn't understand the Plato he's talking about, nor does he understand the Christ he's talking about either.
Well, you're probably not the only one that's read him.
I'm not sure that anybody understands the Christ. It's not something to be understood.
Well, yeah, exactly, and that's part of the problem, and what I'm getting at here. When you write a treatise like, Aquinas did, Summa Theologica, you've already made the wrong turn somewhere.
Yeah, you could use some levels or something, but that doesn't mean your descriptions are worthless. But it does mean that
they may not be.
You're talking within a system of some kind, and that imposes its own limits.
I mean, it is true that exoterism is exoterism. That doesn't mean that it isn't what it should be. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. It was, in fact, a form that was given by the divinity.
Yeah.
And that form is, in fact, necessary for the salvation of lots of people. In other words, it is the ladder they climb upon, just
within its own limited range.
And it might lead beyond its own limits for certain people, and then it's accomplished its job.
Well, it is in fact, because religion is given to the majority of mankind, it is in fact the most common way you find man.
All that lives is religious, and mankind is uniquely full of poverty in that respect, in the way that the animals and the plants are not. They cannot help but worship the divinity. You cannot say that the divinity gave us metaphysics, nor that the divinity gave us language. The English language or any other language that currently is spoken has not existed throughout all of human history. If anything, what you can say is that the divinity set in course a series of events that culminated in the human species, who originally had something akin to a direct connection to the divine. And everything since that point has been us trying to reclaim that with ever increasing levels of turpitude.
Well,
are you saying, for instance, that the names given to Adam by God were not manifestations of the Word, and Word was in fact the Word of God?
How is there anything that isn't a manifestation of the Word?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not the Word itself, except in the sense that, things that we experience as divine are not God.
The Word comes in two flavors: the non-created Word and then the created Word. And Christ is the created Word.
And so is all of our language.
And so is everything. I mean, one of the things that Bataille tried to do is to try to say that all of this high-minded stuff is limiting religion. He wrote this poem where he said that he took a shit and he realized that the shit was a manifestation of God as well. And he's 100% correct.
Oh, yeah.
And he rubbed himself all over with it and was happy.
Well, not necessarily, but...
Well, I mean, what are you saying anyway?
It's saying that, like in the Gospel of John, that nothing was created without the Word. Anything that has been created is created by the Word, by and through the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and all things were created by it or from it. So,
and I think you can also translate that as in the highest, because that's what the word arche expresses.
Which word?
In arche, in the beginning.
Oh, in the beginning.
Translated in the beginning, and
yes.
But it's in. If you look at the Latin, it's in principio.
Yes, it is.
And if you look at the Greek, it's in arche, in the highest. So, at any rate.
Yeah, well, it's true that in the beginning is actually before time unfolds. So, I mean, it's right at that border between eternity and time. That's when time begins. It's not in time yet. It's on the edge. And then time flows forth along with the creation.
I would say, that I feel that all of the tendencies that I see of trying to diminish tradition and make it more a model of man's thinking, I don't agree with.
No, but it's an inevitable temptation, and people will do it.
But here we are honoring God and tradition by understanding that these various expressions and instantiations of his being and expression are necessarily limited.
They're necessarily limited, and most of them come from a sincere attempt filled with goodwill.
And it doesn't mean they're wrong, and it doesn't mean they aren't useful, but they're an expression of the real.
Right.
Or as the Tao Te Ching says, words that are definitely true and strictly true are by definition a paradox.
Well, that seems to hold for all the words I run into.
Well, that's more or less what I think too.
Look.
It's all I'm saying is that those things to be experienced don't have to be manifested. In other words, there is a viewpoint which transcends manifestation, and that is the viewpoint that we're talking about
Now,
avatars.
what are they?
Could I try to
Sure.
tell one of my stories?
Please.
I used to work for the Texas Public Utility Commission when I was middle-aged, and there were 120 people. It was kind of a new and relatively small agency, and my boss, head of the hearings division, who was married, and he got involved in an affair with a woman who was the head of the public relations department, and was also married. And there were certain events that happened that were kind of scandalous, and there was not just a huge amount of gossip going around this little 120
I imagine.
people agency. And I remember trying to console them one time by saying, well, you know, when everything has been said about a subject or a topic or an event that can possibly be said, then there's just nothing else to say about it. And
Yeah.
maybe we've reached that point on this topic.
Oh, yeah. It also it's another thing that once again reminds me of the line from Jethro Tull. It says, "The last hymn is sung, and the devil cries more."
But we do have an agenda of questions here if you want to go on.
An agenda? Uh-oh.
Agenda, well.
Let's go. Of course we have.
All right. Continuing with Bataille from last week, or Tuesday, I should say. Bataille writes, "You should shut yourself off as tranquilly as possible. Create a void within yourself. Give yourself up completely while remaining seated, though without letting your body go slack, let your mind go. And first, breathe deeply, attempting to let yourself be possessed by the silence. This could become a real torpor. I think that it is time that we all begin to go to the ends of mystical experience, which is demanded by the erotic experience of a human being who does not sink. All of the preventions that you might have don't resist the experience itself. At the point at which we are, it is out of the question that we do not do everything that is possible to burn like fire." Notwithstanding that this was a man who had written a text called Summa Atheologica, the method is remarkably developed and shares some similarities to our method. Could we perhaps learn from this master atheist?
Possibly in the realm of practice, in particular.
Well,
Yeah,
I
he
think
doesn't bring revelation, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't seen anything.
I think we discussed this the last time as to what was meant by the word atheist.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And we've had two earlier questions referring to Bataille.
Yeah. But I don't think we have to wonder too much about it. Generally an atheist rejects the theism of his own culture. That's what the reaction is against.
I remember Sheikh Hossein saying years ago that even in early, very primitive times, most villages, they had a village atheist, but the difference is there are a lot more of them now. You might have one in a village 10,000 years ago, but there seem to be more per capita these days.
The village is overpopulated with them now.
Well, it's kind of difficult to think that you believe that something is not real.
Seems pretty easy for some people, but I think.
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy for them to say it, but for them to actually know that it is not real is an impossibility in a way.
They're
What
just
is it that you
skeptical, I
know?
guess.
Right.
In the classic world, there were lots of people that were considered atheists, but they still didn't deny the power of experience. The few people that did were probably called politicians. So I guess things haven't really changed much between then and now. But they're nihilists, of course, that deny everything, including experience. But I think whether you're a monotheist, a polytheist, a dualist, or an atheist really ultimately makes no difference whatsoever, as long as you're willing to put yourself out there and embrace the possibility of experience. If you shut yourself off to experience, then that's a problem. But there are plenty of people that label themselves as great believers, monotheists, or whatever, but they shut themselves off to experience, and they're ultimately no different than the most stark raving mad atheist. So
and there are atheists who have, in spite of themselves, had experiences that they identify as holy in some way, even though they don't have a context, to put it in. I mean, in other words, you could have an amazing experience that proves to you something transcendent because you've experienced some transcendence, but it doesn't mean that you buy into the religion of your society, but you've still seen something.
I've said my wife is an atheist in the sense that she thinks most of the aspects of religion, practice of religion, are bad, that the harm outweighs any good, but she believes in love, she believes in family and community and service to family and community. So she's certainly not a nihilist. A nihilist, I guess, would say, I don't believe in anything, to hell with everybody, but she's certainly not that.
Yeah, the problem with most atheism is that they throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are things about religion as they encounter it that they're aware of the contradictions, which are inevitable.
And they're there, yes, which are certainly there.
They rejoice in them to some extent.
And so they feel like these the people who speak a particular religious language are saying things that don't make sense. And it's true from this point of view.
For people who don't believe there is a God, they certainly spend a lot of time preoccupied with it.
Yeah, that's true.
It's non-reality, which is
yeah, those people are not so much atheists as they are campaigners for a belief system that
Yes,
is
it's a belief system.
Another belief system.
Well, I think the only the viewpoint that's more legitimate or more easily attainable is the ones, the people who don't disbelieve in God, they just don't. The agnostics.
Yeah, agnosticism is is often the most honest point of view, and atheism is a little dishonest.
But most atheists, at some point or another, come out as if they hate God.
Well, that's a different
thing. They like to replace him with their own thinking, and that's basically.
Yeah. Well, that's like somebody who hates somebody saying, I don't have an enemy.
Yes.
Well, again, my wife doesn't ever really call herself an atheist. She says she's a humanist, secular humanist, but mostly just humanist. But lately, she's gotten very interested in gardening and taking courses in master gardening, and has developed a much greater appreciation for nature. She has this fascination with trees. I mean, anywhere we take a vacation, she'll find out what's the biggest tree in and we'd make side trips to see these giant trees. So she has reverence for nature, which is better, seems like a good thing to me.
Does she have any practice like meditation or anything like that?
No, I don't. I would say
Because
no.
you can have a non-religious practice of meditation, and it's still beneficial. It's not exactly the path to the absolute, but it's still beneficial.
Maybe not. That's up to the absolute.
Well, yes, that's true. But in that case, it's not a question of following a path. It's a fact of being drawn something. What is it? Jiriki and Kiriki? What are they?
Yes, outside other
Power and other power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with these terms. Somebody explain them.
Yeah, where does that come from? Is that Buddhist or
Buddhism, yes.
Yeah, it's Japanese Buddhism.
All right. Oh yeah, it's Japanese.
Would elaborate on them a little bit? I'd like to hear more about what they mean, the contrast you're talking about.
You can be unbalanced in both directions.
Oh yeah.
You can be so confident of your own self-power that you don't realize your limitations, or you can be so in love with other power that you don't enable your own capability to right.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, both can be a problem.
Yeah, or both other power and self-power are inevitable and necessary.
Right.
And if you only rely on one, then your vision is limited and you're missing out on something.
Yes, there's a place for both.
Yes, and there shouldn't be a place for just one or the other.
I mean, you know, God criticized Moses for his lack of self-power to some extent.
Well, we can all be criticized for that.
Yes, but I mean, you know, that just to substantiate that perspective, as well as the perspective of relying upon other power.
Right. It's sort of like active and passive faith.
I was thinking back to that question Advaita Vedanta gave us not long ago about why do we spend so much time worrying about death? And I've several times, four out of the 5 of us are older than she is, and just given the normal death by natural causes, and not an accident or some terminal disease that cuts short the normal lifespan. We've spent virtually all of our lives trying to figure out how to get along in this world and the human state. But as we get closer to the end of it, we start thinking, well, how are we going to get along? How are we going to get along in the next state? It becomes of interest, you know.
What I notice now is that almost daily I hear something from somebody or from somewhere which is disturbing, and it's a narrative of something that is likely to happen, and you're in great danger of it happening to you.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like these messages are constantly, you're being bombarded with them every place you go.
Sure.
And so I think that's a symptom of the times.
Yeah.
It's a symptom of human psychology, unfortunately, to be preoccupied with the future and think you can know a whole lot more about it than you can.
Well, I think, though, there is deliberate attempts to destabilize the human race.
Maybe.
It's going on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And
I don't know, it's enough to have an undue amount of fear to be preoccupied with what's going to happen in the future. And we certainly have, I think, a lot more fear than we used to.
Oh, for sure.
well, we are being bombarded with things that would evoke that too, to some extent.
Sure. Oh yeah, but
That's-
it really is it is really the collective fear of the unknown, of what's in the future, that's got everybody worrying about it and deciding how to avoid having this or that bad thing happen, or to make sure that this or that good thing happens. And
in many cases, these things are very specific. They target very specific things.
They do.
Yeah,
Because they have to pick something. They have to pick something that's right and have something else be wrong. It's just,
I mean, we can imagine or foresee or anticipate or worry about all kinds of bad things happening in the future, but there have been so many bad things that have happened in the past. I mean, I didn't have to fight the invasion of Normandy. I wasn't a Jew in Germany in the 30s and 40s. So there's so many really, really bad things that have happened that it's difficult to imagine. I mean, no matter how bad things get in the future, they're going to be worse than what some people. I mean, the Rohingya who had to leave Myanmar and go into Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world,
where they get blown away by the next typhoon. Yeah.
Bad things are happening to people. There's no doubt.
Yeah, but there's no reason to believe that something equivalent to the bad that's happened in the past can't happen in the future. But fear makes you stupid. I keep coming back to that. It clouds your vision. You can't, you're going to, if fear is guiding you, you will fall into the pit.
Well, such narratives as the one preceding the Russian Revolution of the elders promulgated supposedly by the elders of Zion.
Yeah.
Those kinds of narratives are at work today.
Oh yeah, sure.
And those kinds of narratives can go to the same limit that did the one that was mentioned there.
Oh well, sure, exactly.
Yeah. Or further, because they've been developed a lot more. The techniques have gotten better.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. We have AI to thank for some of that.
Well, we have AI to give us something more to fear in the future, but I think a little vigilance about it is a really good idea. But fear doesn't help.
Well, yes, one would have to be, I guess, blind in some respects not to see that some of the same things that have happened in the past are building towards happening again.
Oh, well,
not identically the same. They can't be identically the same.
Yeah.
But
the influences don't disappear. There's something like the protocols. It satisfies a need to explain something you don't understand, as most conspiracy theories do. And we'll always have them because there's always missing information, and there's always people that are obviously not telling the truth about things.
And have a self-interested interest in their explanation to these things.
Yeah, exactly. And the protocols is handy because it blames other people for the problems, and the problems are in the souls of the current human beings. And I'm saying there are never any conspiracies. Of course there are. We wouldn't have the word. But all the evil is present in our own hearts, and we want to point outwardly and say it lies there, and then you go to war.
I think one thing you said, Siddhi Kala, I would question, where you said that fear is stupid or it's useless or something, but it can be helpful if you're actually facing danger. And I'm thinking of the kids who are on the floor in the schoolroom in Uvalde who covered themselves in blood. I'm sure they were as afraid as anybody could possibly be. and yet they took precautions to save themselves. And
Yeah, sure. And that kind of fear doesn't make you stupid. Sometimes it makes you think very clearly.
To save
But-
your life, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, but that's different. That's recognizing a threat.
No, you're in the threat. You're in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a present, clear and present danger.
Yeah.
Just the other day, I was watching an interview with Pope Francis, and he was talking about this. And he mentioned how when he was a teenager, he went to see some film with his brother, and they saw skydivers. And when they got back to their house, his brother should have had fear, but didn't, and took an umbrella and jumped off of their balcony and ended up breaking his arm. So sometimes it's good to have fear.
Well, and that's what I feel about the exoteric form of tradition. It is to some extent a protection, which is becoming sadly disrepaired.
Yeah, and it promotes faith.
But it is a protection against problems that people who are not intellectually acute to it will fall victim to.
Right, but fear,
wait a minute.
fear is still fear. If you're not in danger, if the fear isn't in the present, then it's going to cloud your vision. It's just not, you know.
What the problem here is that the term fear is too broad. You know,
Yes.
Right.
I don't put my hand on the stove, not because I'm afraid of it.
But you know, you could, if you see if you're crossing the street and you see a bus headed toward you,
You're right.
you experience fear, but it's
It's time to step aside.
it's recognizing a real danger,
Right.
and but being preoccupied with a theoretical or future danger.
That's fear.
Yeah, there's no solution. You know, you're spinning your wheels, you're not doing anything. Now, if you see something that you can do to address a problem that appears on the horizon, then fine. But
Well, I mean, of course,
so that if something if you lose your job, you won't starve. You know, but that's prudence. It's not. It doesn't get the adrenaline going and the amygdala all fired up.
Well, ideally, there'd be no place for fear.
Ideally.
You would understand the logical consequences of doing this or obeying that or not doing that, and that would be sufficient.
Yeah, you can recognize a danger, and if the thing you recognize as the danger gets too close, you may feel fear. But that's an instinctive self-preservation thing. That's not.
well,
Not in your imagination. That's right there.
my father, who was an Eagle Scout, said, when you have one scout, you have a whole scout. When you have two scouts, you have half a scout. When you have three scouts, you have no scouts at all. And the point here that some errors in thinking that become prevalent amongst vast majorities of people become a tornado that will destroy much.
Yeah, it's not always Vox Day. Sometimes it's Vox Diable. But in the long run, it's always Vox Day.
But we don't live in the long run. We live here and now, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, if you stop and think, let's say you're experiencing some anxiety, and you stop and think, well, wait a minute. What is the danger in the moment? Well, such and such might happen. That's not in the moment. Is there any danger right now? Or even for that matter, is there anything actually really wrong right now in this particular instant? When you try to find something wrong, you usually have to look away and forward or back. It's not.
Well,
Yeah.
and of course, a lot of that is dependent upon the clarity of your judgment.
Of course, you know,
I mean,
but
some things really do
there are dangers.
are something that need to be avoided.
Oh yeah.
Disequilibriums in general are something that you don't want to be in the middle of.
Exactly. But if you find yourself in the middle of one, and know how to think or how to respond, you can relativize it, not in a denying way, but in a clear-headed way,
Right.
and be free of it. It doesn't mean the danger went away if there is in fact one.
No, but the fear went away.
Yeah. And
Right.
you'll be better able to respond to a danger if you're not overcome by fear. I mean, think of the people that respond sort of spontaneously in really awful situations. You know, run into a house on fire or whatever,
Right.
and they don't have any time for fear.
Yeah.
And if they had fear, they couldn't have acted.
Well, that is true that if it is a grace to be given a certainty of what to do with confidence.
Well, yeah, but sometimes it's just not having a question, not even asking the question. It's, you know, you see and you do.
Yeah.
That's right. But you also, you have a certain confidence in your action.
You don't even think about confidence.
I think you don't have to think about it.
Exactly. There's no room for confidence, fear, uncertainty, or anything in those moments. You act.
Yeah. I think of the word courage, and that's the ability to overcome fear and act
Yes, that's
to save yourself or to save somebody else or to save something.
Yeah.
Even though it's quite dangerous, but
courage is feel the fear and do it anyway.
yeah.
And the heroic behavior is you just do it.
I'm reminded of my wife, who was on many occasions complimented on being fearless in a variety of different scenarios. And her response was, no, I'm not fearless. I just don't have the flight gene.
The flight gene?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's about the same thing on practical level, but yeah, could make the distinction.
Yeah.
Fight or fly. Flight or...
Well, sometimes the problem is a much more cerebral one. That's a little bit harder to avoid.
Oh yeah, there are lots of problems in the cerebral realm. and there are lots of problems that only exist in that realm.
Right.
Well, and they're by definition less real.
Yeah, of course, I don't have any of those.
We've noticed that.
So it's now 7. So we can either go on to another question, or I have 2 quotes that I think you might be interested in that are optional, or whatever else you want to do.
Well, you could read to us.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
could read to us, and we could sit here and do nothing, you know.
I mean, you know, you brought something for show and tell. Go.
Yes, I brought something for show and tell. The first one is a poem called Cougar.
Cougar, the animal.
Yes.
Yes.
A sensed presence, turning our heads. We saw him at once, the great cat, not 30 yards off at the clearing's edge, tawny red in the late spring light, as if years in the redwoods, the rose manzanita, and the russet madrone had deepened his hue, but of his own accord and set purpose entered the precinct of Kingfisher Flat, stepped out of the zone of protective coloration to accost us, not as menace or threat, but as revelation, the glimpse of something long withheld that we needed to know, something given purely for our own well-being, a glimpse of the God. And we gasped, gratified. The cat looked at us calmly, to then turn back, but paused again, gazing over his tawny shoulder, holding us in that level look, the sinuous tail leisurely a twist, tentatively weighing whether or not to go or to stay. That was the moment. The dog caught scent and sprang up bristling. One explosive bark burst out of his lungs, and then he charged. Instantly, the lion swung on his track, swung in the long cat-like lope, but when the dog gained on him, broke into the flat-out feline streak and disappeared down the trail, the dog in pursuit, purposefully following, but at a safe distance. And I, too, at a safe distance followed. I found his track in wet clay, and then ran on. Ahead, up the ridge, the dog broke into furious barking, and then fell still, to return untouched, but slouching, head down and well quit of it, the event clearly over. I went back to the track for confirmation, the wide padded paw, the rounded toes unmarked by claws, the signature of the cat. Days passed by, April merged into May, May burned itself out in the swelter of June, and summer pounced. We never saw him again, but the single print in the set clay retains its distinctness, as tangible as the stunning presence in the hushed afternoon, the solemn moment when the veil was rent, the earthly music suddenly fell still, and the god, imperious, gathered us into those wakeful eyes and was gone.
That's lovely.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is
written
from
by Lawrence, I bet.
No, it wasn't written by Lawrence. And the second thing is a piece of prose from the same author. And I'll name the author after I read this. It's called Divinely Superfluous Beauty. Beauty is the blood of God. Like a divine emanation, it infuses the substances of all animate being, as well as every inanimate thing. It is the essence of the truth that sustains the cosmos, and as such, it embraces the polarities of good and evil and subsumes them into the ambience of its total synthesis. Its essence is transformal, but it manifests itself in form. Beauty is the blood of God in the sense that it is what the eyes behold of the life force. The great heart pumps eternally, the pulsation of its infusion into contingency, the absolute manifesting itself in powerful tidal throbs through the cosmos, interpenetrating the steeps and declivities of tangentiality, endowing every rupture and deformity with its flux of synthesis. The blood of God both sustains and moves the cosmos. In its suffusion, it fills, oceanic, the whole of reality, but river-like it circulates and renews, highlighting in its peaked accents, shimmering across the confines and interstices of structure, sparkling and irradiating, glittering and renewing, suffusing and glowing, at once constant and changing, agitated and serene. Beauty pulls back fragmentation from diffusion into coherence, restructures the rudimentary basis of things upon a higher principle of synthesis. The gash of violation is accommodated into the unity of its dismembered wholeness. As in birth, the rupture of forms, beauty lifts wrenched violations into totality, sinks evanescences down to subsistent concretizations, specifies in order to illuminate.
Yeah.
I like the first one better, but anyway.
I think I liked this one better.
Okay. You're wrong. You're wrong, and I'm right. So.
Well, of course.
So who is that?
William Everson.
William Everson. I wrote that name down last time.
Yes, and you're not going to find any of his stuff online because he's too good for people today. So, so it's one of those few cases where you actually can't find his stuff online. I think people just don't care about him. He's something of a nature mystic who also for a long time was a renegade Catholic monk. So I think neither side likes him particularly much, and he tended to write long lined poems, And that's not what people want to read. They don't want to read long lined poems. They want to read simple things, stupid things that are 40 characters or less.
Yeah, bite-sized.